Hello and welcome to the Nation Fridays edition. You're joining me, Eleanor Abla. And as usual, every Friday on The Nation, we'll be discussing trending news and stories within the week together with our selected panelists. And today I'm joined by Dr. Bridget Welsh, political analyst, AZMI HASSAN, Geo-strategist from Nusantara Academy, and Dr. A.T. KUMARARAJAH, Treasurer General of NCCIM. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'll begin with stories that have been trending, and the first story is a slightly long introduction. We're talking about food safety and security. 7th of June, which was last Tuesday, was World Food Safety Day, and we've discussed this topic at length recently, and there are many opinions and suggestions regarding this matter. The King says the food security crisis needs to be addressed immediately, saying that a long-term plan must be drawn up to strengthen food security and ensure the cost of living is at a reasonable level. Of course, there have been opinions by the Health Minister, Khairy Jamaluddin, saying his ministry was looking into the need to upgrade the Food Safety and Quality Division as the Food Safety Authority. Science and Technology and Innovation Minister says IoT and AI can help improve food security in Malaysia. And there are thoughts that the government should revive the Food Security Council. Comments by experts, economists, analysts, consumer representatives have been coming from all angles, saying that Malaysia needs effective policies, medium to long-term action now to avoid similar problems in the future. Let's throw it to the panel. What are your thoughts with regards to this? Can we start with you, Dr. Bridget?
Yes, good afternoon, Elaine. I think you've laid out the issues very clearly, some of the needs for our long-term policy issues and a plan, which I think is not in place. But I think there are two kind of key points I want to emphasize, is that the food security issues hits different communities very differently. We're talking about those that are more impoverished, but also different regions. For example, in Borneo, we see an impact on food security that is much more significant because of the lack of access to some of the goods because of the way the trade flows and supply chain issues are at place. So I think that, that the second issue that I would emphasize is the fact that there has to be much more involvement with stakeholders and civil society actors in this process. It can't just be something done alone. It is about transforming Malaysia's economy towards a much more agricultural, sustainable economy that addresses including issues of climate change, but also agricultural production.
Thank you, Doc. AT, I would like to jump over to you for your comments, please.
Sure. I think the food security and policy, like you mentioned, Elaine, is primarily, we can't do much about demand side, like what Dr. Bridget mentioned, right? So the demand side will keep increasing, and I think that's a consumption equation. But the supply side, so what the government can primarily do is supply side issues need to be taken care of. One is the supply chain. Where do we get our food security from? Because we already run a deficit every year. So we import more than we export. And that's one big issue. But then just internalizing or domestic investments alone will not sufficient to increase food production to make up for that deficit. So we must be able to have a very clear multilateral supply chain that will ensure that in terms of stockpiling, in terms of security, in terms of just-in-time food, and especially those primary items that cause inflation to go up very, very fast, spiral out of proportion, like sugar, wheat, rice, primary items. And that's really something that we must look into. I think we have policy in place. It's just that we need a little bit more agile and just-in-time policies to ensure that, we have a primary nice curve and not something which is up and down.
Great. AZMI, can we go to you for your comments here now?
Yeah, I think Dr. Bridget will agree with me when I say the narrative currently is that blame it on Mr. Putin. But again, this food security has been going on a long time ago, except that it has not been our high priority. I think now it's the high priority, as Dr. Bridget said, and Dr. A.T. said, we need long-term policy. I think we need to think very hard, very difficult. And I agree, Dr. Bridget said, this food security, it hits different parts of the community differently. So you need a kind of different policy to tackle this problem, Elaine.
Thank you, AZMI. Now, I think this has been a long-standing issue. We need to be able to create a long-term policy and create action that's immediate for us to be able to see this happening in the next couple of years. Dr. Bridget, I'd like to go to stories that you've wanted to highlight this week. Perhaps you can share with us what's on your mind this week.
Well, one of the issues I'm looking at is the concerns about the Bon Odori Festival, right? Which is that I think there's clearly a kind of misunderstanding about this festival and the importance of kind of having a more globalized outlook toward of Malaysia, especially with Japan is one of leading investors in Malaysia with 80 billion ringgit in the last 60 years. So I think that it's been interesting to see the conversations that are taking place about it, and it is my sincere hope that I think that the calls for changing the name of the festival and looking at it with a bit of suspicion is actually sort of is addressed, and in fact, actually, the festival goes on as it is. I think as the Sultan of Selangor has indicated it will, and I think that we can see a different outlook and a different way of embracing different diversity and different diverse cultures that are happening in Malaysia.
Doug, what is the underlying issue that's creating this kind of conversation, you think?
Well, I think some parts of Malaysian politicians are using issues of race and religion to kind of promote themselves, and they're very suspicious. They look at the issue of the festival as saying that it's promoting alternative religions, when in fact, actually, it is a deep cultural and historical traditional festival of Japan. And so I think that there is this kind of attempt to kind of use politics in, I think, a very unconstructive manner.
There you go. I'm very glad that the Sultan of Selangor has come up to encourage people to visit the festival in order for them to experience it for themselves. AT, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, I think we must, this takes into context every festival that's celebrated, Elaine. You know, it's not only because many festivals probably have racial or religious basis denominators, but then over the years, right? So the Bon Odori is what, 600 years? That's what I read. So after 600 years, it's taken a completely different dimensions, and it's a cultural thing. And I think we owe it to the Japanese, at least what I believe there's 35,000 people take part in it annually prior to the COVID period. So one thing is, I think His Majesty, the Sultan of Selangor, is probably the biggest proponent of Bon Odori now, and says, look, Malaysians must come out and really learn about what's happening in other parts of the world, and especially with our Japanese partners. And I think Dr. Bridget mentioned we have got 150 billion. Japan is our fourth largest trading partner. So with that things at stake, and I think we must be able to embrace this in a larger scale, because we're talking about more geopolitical needs rather than a particular political dimension that seems to be the thing that politicians want to do.
Yes, AZMI, your thoughts?
When you mention politicians, I think these are very small number of politicians. I think these politician things, we Malaysian, especially the Muslim Malaysian, are very naive. I think we are not that naive. And as Elaine said, thank God for Sultan of Selangor.
And I think there's a lot to be said about the ability for us Malaysians to be able to discern what is cultural and what is religious. We will be able to enjoy and be able to appreciate the cultural festivities, the diversity that we welcome as Malaysians, versus it sort of like being imposed by some religious parties who want to be able to perhaps have agendas to create sort of a separation, a segregation with regards to cultural festivities. But let's go to the next story. I would like to ask AT to bring up, I think you want to talk about GST, AT.
Sure. Actually, I mean, I was thinking, Dr. Bridget mentioned Bon Odori, and I was thinking when I suggested that topic, everything is about Japan, because it starts with what our Prime Minister said when he gave this interview to Nikkei to them, and said, look, we're probably considering bringing back GST to have a much better tax system in the country. And I think it was followed up with a few more echoes, that's including the finance minister, who said we are still studying. A lot of people made conclusions and said, look, it's probably going to be implemented now. The politician says, look, it's probably after the general election. But bringing back GST is probably one of the better things we should do, at least for the medium term, because GST is a lot more broad-based thing. And I think even in the early days when we implemented it in 2015 and then put it set back in 2018, if you just take a simple example, Elaine, you look at the consumer price index, which is what our inflation is based on, that basket. If you use GST, then 6 out of those 10 items are actually taxed, which means a lot more broad-based. Whereas if we use the current sales and services tax that we have now, only 4 out of those 10 items are taxed. So in a country where only 15% of the working population is actually paying taxes, I think we need a lot more broad-based tax systems. The only issue is when it comes to repayments, and I think at one time we had about nearly 20 billion ringgit not being paid to about 120,000 companies. Now, because the processes are not very ironed out yet, we cannot kill the whole idea of GST. So I think you should bring back GST, whether it is 3, 4, 6%, debatable, but every year we lose close to $20 billion in terms of revenue. Bring back GST and bring back a lot more smoother implementation. We have the learning curve, so we cannot say we don't have a playbook. And I think we are in a lot more better position to bring back GST now.
Yeah, I think it'll take a little bit of time, as Finance Minister Tengku Zafrul did mention that reintroducing it would be a little bit more time consuming because it was abolished. It can't be just reinstated as it was taken out, and we would need approval by the Parliament. And he did say the timeline would be about 9 months if they wanted to reintroduce GST. AZMI, would you like to comment on GST here?
Yeah, Elaine, Dato' AT, I think by all means we can bring back GST, but we have to be very careful because some unscrupulous businessmen will use the introduction of GST to increase the price of goods. I think that's what we are worried too much. It will increase the coffers of the government. That's good, but there will be instances that the price of goods will be increased. I'm sure our Minister of Finance are thinking very hard, because there are rumors that he wants to be a member of Parliament. We never know.
but that's true, right, Elaine? Just what Prof said, right? So if you take the reverse, but abolishing GST did not bring prices down. In reverse, in fact, abolishment of GST from the time of 2018 to now, our prices have continued to increase. And actually, a GST will be a one-off price increase, and then we full stop. So in many ways, it is still a better system compared to the SST, right?
There are others who disagree, though. I mean, I think that, and I think it's useful to put some of those arguments on the table. I think the problem with the previous GST was the process of implementation, and there were multiple specs that came out in terms of the confidence of the business community. There was a lot of price gouging, and we did see a very large increase in terms of inflation. And keep in mind, right now, Malaysia is in a period of very significant inflation that is hurting ordinary people. And I think that, this timing is going to be a problem for many people, even 9 months down the road, until you try to find other engines in the economy. And then there are other sides of this that I think are important. One is where the money is going to, in terms of, if you want more taxes, then what are the benefits that citizens are going to have if they're going to have to be paying more taxes, and also the leakages in the system. These are issues that I think need to be looked at holistically. If they bring in this tax, which is very controversial, it's very politicized, it has to also take a very different form. It has to be lower, and it has to have more gaps and space for those that are actually been the more poorest in the parts of Malaysia. So I think there needs to be a more sophisticated, broad-based conversation about this. Right now, it's being politicized as one side versus the other. And I think, yes, Malaysia needs more revenue. It needs a revenue system that is actually fair and progressive and balanced. And it needs to diversify its revenue system. But it also needs to consider these other questions as opposed to just pushing it on the society, because you're going to get a reaction. And if we look at Malaysian history, we see that there have been multiple tax rebellions. And I think one has to look at what happened in GE14 as a product of that. There was a response by society. So it has to be done that in a much more holistic manner. And I think it has to take a very different implementation strategy. And timing will be very important if you increase the taxes and do it in a way that actually is cognizant of what's happening in the economy.
Dr. Bridget, what's your take? Are you for a GST implementation in the near future?
I think we need to have, if we have a GST, it needs to be a very different type of GST in terms of the way it was implemented, and it has to be at a much lower rate with more protections for ordinary people. But I also think it has to come with a much stronger assessment of the leakages in the system and where the money is going to be spent, so that there is something that that Malaysians will get from the GST, not just the programs that are continuing as they are, because there are too many leakages in the system.
AT, your thoughts on GST before we move on to the next topic?
No, I still think, right, so you cannot use just a GST as a revenue model, right? So the GST idea is a lot more equitable taxing, because that equitable taxing is based on consumption. So if you consume more, you pay more. That will even bring back that question of why we're spending $30 billion just on fuel subsidies alone. So in many ways, GST is a lot more equitable in the sense that the guys who consume more pay more. So to me, it's a fairer system, implementation being one very good concern, but it is not because there is a political angle to it. It must be because it's a much better system than the SSTs.
Thank you.
ATK, we know it's politicized, so we have to.
Yes,
how to
we agree.
That's the key thing.
I mean, the whole G14 was based on GST, right?
The implementation. So we will have the yays, we will have the nays, and we'll see how we can sort of balance in between. AZMI, I want to bring up your topic for this week. Can you tell us what's on your mind?
Yeah, Elaine, I think one of the least discussed in the next parliament sitting is the parliament transformation. And one part of that has been discussed a lot about parliament transformation is to bar members of parliament who has the current court cases going on to attend the parliament sitting. But again, I think there's another part of the bill that are quite interesting, which is the code of conduct for our parliamentarians, which is very lacking right now. I'm sure that the BRIDGET and Dr. AT, if you look at our parliament debate, it is very, I would say, very shameful because there are a lot of sexist remarks. There are a lot of racist remarks, but these parliamentarians, Dr. AT, they cannot be reprimanded because we have only standing order. We don't have any code of conduct. So I think it's high time that this code of conduct for our parliamentarians to be tabled as soon as possible so that we can expect much more from our parliamentarians. Elaine?
Dr. BRIDGET, let's hear your thoughts on this.
Well, I think that Prof. AZMI is correct that there have been many comments that have been negative and inappropriate. But I would also say that generally the conduct of Parliament has improved in terms of the quality of speeches and the discussion and the debate overall. And I would say that Malaysia's Parliament does fare reasonably well with some of the performance of other places. But that said, I think that there is an urgent need to actually address some of these issues and to strengthen the debate, to actually to improve the focus on policy. We've seen this as part and parcel of a series of important reforms that have been taking place in the Parliament, especially the committees. And I think that this is an extension of that, and I think it is something that should be strongly endorsed.
AT.
Sure. Actually, the code of conduct, while it's welcome, Elaine, my only thing is it shouldn't go to a level where it starts stifling the debate that happens. Now, I totally agree that the debate quality must improve by few bounds, but in terms of it should not come as in terms of curtailing it. To some extent, then it will eventually become very sterile. So while that you must encourage good quality debate, but that code of conduct cannot stop parliamentarians from voicing out certain issues, which may not be something that they are comfortable speaking outside. So that August House of Parliament giving that protection within the House for parliamentarians to say something should be welcome, but it should be used responsibly. So I think that part of it also must be part of this code of conduct. If not, it will seem to be reprimanding or stifling some debates, which may be healthy. And our Westminster system, I think across the Commonwealth, I think we are not great, but we are not that bad either.
I think we just need to level up on those issues that I think sort of like make us look a little bit shameful. But like you said, on the whole, I think we're doing pretty well. Dr. BRIDGET, can we go on to your next topic for this week?
Well, I wanted to focus more generally on the challenges of the economic recovery. I think that I think right now what we've seen in Malaysia is the economy has done reasonably well especially compared to last year in the first quarters of the year. And a lot of that has been with the opening up in the economy itself. But I am concerned that about how this is going to move. And I think Malaysia probably doesn't fully recognize that what's happening in the global economy beyond the war, but the stagflation that is happening, the supply chain problems, the problems in China. And I think that, I think that there needs to be, as we were discussing earlier, not only in terms of the food security policies, but a much broader, more comprehensive stepping up of initiatives that are going to promote the economy in not only in the perspective of the sense of maintaining growth, but transforming the economy in a kind of new way. And I think we're not seeing that enough of that yet in terms of long-term planning. And this is a challenge because a lot of the focus politically is on the potential prospective elections of a different positioning. But this is a pivotal time for Malaysia to make policy interventions that are actually going to set it on its path. If it's delayed in doing that now, it will actually be it will actually promote the inequalities that have happened during the COVID period and really stymie the economic recovery. The economic recovery is not benefiting everybody equally, and Malaysia's economy needs to be transformed and more meaningfully to have more sustainability over the longer and even the short and medium term.
Right. Any comments, Dr. Eti?
I think, like what Dr. Bridget said, we are on that path, but that path is again not very equitable across the sectors. And I think some sectors we're really doing very, very well. Some sectors we could do better, but some of it is being held back simply because they've got issues with terms of foreign workers. For example, our plantation sector, we cannot seem to reap that full benefit of CPO prices being sky high simply because you just don't have enough foreign workers to pluck those palm off the trees. So I think some sectors which are doing well should be given that necessary short-term support that the government intends to do. You look some of these big glove companies which are doing very, very well. I was just reading today morning, realized all of them have reported nearly 100% drop in profits and revenue. So that's really going to stop that bandwagon from moving much further. So in many ways, we are doing very well. And then one proxy indicator, what came out yesterday is in terms of unemployment. We have come back to more or less near pre-pandemic. We are not at the lowest, but we are at least at the lower than our past 2.5 years experience. Unemployment is at 3.9%. And that number is actually very, very encouraging simply because we've put more jobs, nearly 200,000 jobs in the last 6 months in the hands of Malaysians. In many ways, our economic policies are good, but we need to put some boosters against the sectors that we can really reap short-term benefit because otherwise we're going to create that vacuum.
AZMI, any thoughts on this before we go to your topic?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in also on my topic. But again, Dr. Bridget, thank you for having confidence on our economy and also talk about good things of our parliamentarians. I would like to talk about Boris Johnson. He did survive for this week, but I think it won't be long. He can survive with 148 of his parliamentarians going against him. But again, talking about parliamentarians, Dr. Bridget and Dr. A.T. Elaine, I think during the House of Commons Prime Minister's question, that I would like to see how our Dewan Rakyat works. Meaning something like that. When the Prime Minister answers a question or going to answer a question from the Labour, I think he did it very brilliantly. He did it using data and using facts. And I think that's what we are lacking from our Wakil Rakyat or our Member of Parliament. I think talking about Boris Johnson, it's going to be very interesting how long he can survive with so many of his own colleagues going against him. I think what that's about democracy is all about.
Dr. Bridget, your thoughts on this?
Well, he's got one more year now before the another vote of confidence. So we're going to see what happens in a year before they have to have elections. But I do think that there is importance about the system being stable, that a vote of confidence has been able to be carried out, and it was done in a way that I think shows that you can have institutions that are stronger. And strengthening institutions is very important for Malaysia. It can't just be about the individuals. It should be about making the institutions follow the rules in a very systematic way. And I think we see this, despite Boris Johnson being highly unpopular among large sections of the society. I think he's going to be around for at least for another year.
AT?
Yeah, I think Boris Johnson is shaken but not stirred. Because with like 41% of his own MPs, own party voting against him. But he has survived. And I think that kind of healthy narrative is what we really want to bring back into our society also. We are at the brink of a next general election ourselves. And I said, while we have this coalition governments in place for the last, 4 years, and I think moving forward, we're probably going to have that kind of denominators being a lot more common. We're not going to have a single party having a huge majority. And in that way, I think the check and balances, both the opposition and the ruling front, would be very, very healthy for our democracies. And I think we have a role to make sure our institutional governance is in place, and all the reforms that we have promised, including that MOUs, which is in place between our two governments or two parties, brings about all this institutional stability. And that's really what will deliver the country, regardless of what the political positions are. So I think it's good. Boris Johnson's move is good for Malaysia because we are at the brink of a general election also.
Thank you so much all for your comments this week. Dr. Bridget Welsh, Dr. A.T. KUMARARAJAH, Professor AZMI HASSAN for The Nation this week on Friday. We have a robust conversation. And that's all the time that we have on The Nation this week. Thanks for staying with me till the end of the session. I'm Lena Blah. Bye for now.